Look down at the steps of the Roman Forum today, and you'll see scratches carved into the marble, not damage. Game boards, grids for board games, cut directly into the stone by bored guards, bored senators' aides, bored citizens standing around with nothing to do, a habit so common across the Roman world that archaeologists have found the same carved grids on temple steps, market floors, and public benches from Britain to North Africa, cut by people who never met each other, solving the exact same problem. How do you get through a day when nothing worth watching is actually happening? Rome ran on boredom the same way it ran on grain and concrete, and the fixes ordinary Romans came up with for it were stranger, funnier, and more obsessive than go watch a gladiator fight. Let's go through them. Start with the most common Roman pastime by a wide margin, and it wasn't in an arena at all. It was dice. Knucklebone dice, called tali, and gridded board games scratched onto tabletops, pavement. Anything flat, these show up everywhere Romans lived, in numbers that dwarf every other form of entertainment combined. Hundreds of these carved gaming boards have turned up across the empire, worn smooth by hands that had absolutely nowhere better to be. The obsession went all the way to the top. The historian Suetonius records that the Emperor Claudius loved dice so much he had a board fitted into his travel carriage so a journey wouldn't force him to stop playing, and he wrote an actual instructional book on how to win. An emperor with the entire machinery of Rome at his disposal, and the part of his legacy is a strategy guide for dice, which honestly isn't so different from checking a game app during your commute, except his commute was a war chariot. Then there's the walls. Pompeii alone has produced thousands of pieces of casual graffiti insults, election slogans, love confessions, jokes about named people, even reviews of the food at a particular tavern. It's tempting to call this ancient social media, and the comparison mostly holds. The same impulse to broadcast an opinion nobody asked for, just carved into plaster instead of typed into a phone. We can't always tell which lines were genuine insults and which were jokes on top of older jokes, but the sheer volume says something on its own. Enough idle time and enough idle hands to leave thousands of these behind on walls nobody expected anyone to read 20 centuries later. Dinner parties had their own built-in escape valve. At a convivium, guests often opened the night by rolling dice to choose a king of the feast, a custom the poet Horace mentions directly, and whoever won got to set the rules for the rest of the evening, including exactly how much wine everyone else had to drink. Saturnalia pushed the same idea much further. For a few days during the year's biggest holiday, enslaved members of a household were served by their masters and allowed to talk back without punishment. The entire household order flipped, on purpose with everyone's knowledge. It's usually described as pure festive fun. It was, but it also worked as a pressure valve in a system that gave the people at the bottom almost no other outlet at all. Boredom didn't stay quiet either. Chariot racing split fans into color factions, the blues and the greens chief among them, and people did not treat this lightly. Fans wore their faction's color, memorized driver records the way people memorize batting averages, and more than once, rivalry between factions spilled into open violence in the streets. This wasn't background noise to Roman life. For a lot of ordinary people, faction loyalty was one of the few things that felt like it belonged to them personally, in a world where almost nothing else did. And then there's the gladiators, the biggest cultural obsession of all, and the part almost never shown. Outside the arena, gladiator fandom looked a lot like modern sports card culture, built around real statistics and real following. Children played with tiny terracotta gladiator figurines, cast in specific fighting poses, the way a kid today might collect action figures of favorite players. Training school walls were carved with running tallies of individual fighters' records, wins and losses tracked name by name, the exact way a stat sheet tracks a player now. A gladiator with a good record wasn't just a fighter people watched once and forgot. He was a name people followed for years, argued about at dinner, and bet on in exactly the way people follow athletes today. None of this needed an arena, a senate, or an emperor to happen. It needed people with a few idle hours and something to do with their hands, and that turns out to be one of the most reliable constants in the historical record, more reliable, honestly, than most of what actually made it into the history books written for kings and wars. We don't know the names of almost anyone who carved these boards or scratched these jokes into a wall, and we're not going to find out now, but that anonymity is exactly why the evidence feels so real. So the next time you picture ancient Rome, picture past the marble columns and the speeches. Picture a guard on a slow shift, scratching a game grid into a step because his watch has 3 more hours left. Picture a kid running his fingers over a tiny gladiator figurine before dinner. That's most of what Roman life actually was. Most days not conquest, just people finding a way to make the time pass. Those scratches in the forum steps were never meant to survive 20 centuries. They were just what people did with their hands while they waited for something to happen. It happened anyway. We just call it history now.